Hello and welcome back to Monkey Week Pro, the last of the conferences and debates and interviews of this week. The last one in English, well, the last one of the professional side, but not the last one in English, because we will have interviews with John Agnello and with Gary Luris over the weekend. But with this debate about streaming, we will end all our conferences for this week. We had the interview with Laetitia Statier from Stereolab this morning. And now let me welcome and say good morning to our guests, because they are both in the United States, one East Coast and one West Coast. First, Cherie Hu. Hi, Cherie. Welcome.
Hi, Heather. Can you see and hear me?
I can't hear you, but I'm sure you are saying that you are glad to be here, hopefully.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me now?
We arranged these because I can't hear them. The other guest is Damon Krukowski, who's in Boston and who's the former drummer of GALAXIE 500 and member of Damon and NAOMI, and wrote the new Analogue, a great book that you all should read, and Ways of Hearing, which is also a podcast, and it's really interesting. Cherie, on the side, she writes a newsletter called Water and Music that everyone should subscribe to, and she's got like 900, I think, subscribers, paying subscribers, or 1,000, which is amazing. And they are two of the people that I know who know more and have thought more about streaming and the economics of streaming. So I hope I can speak with them. Give a moment, because all I can see now is Damon waving.
Yeah.
In the
Hola,
meantime,
Joan.
I'll explain you, Damon, Cherie, and anyone else who's just jumping in here and hasn't been watching for this week. Monkey Week is a showcase festival with a tiny industry conference attached to it. That's been going for 12 years. And this year, because we couldn't do the shows, the showcases and conferences as usual, we decided we didn't want to do just a stream of live shows on camera. We wanted to do something different. So we arranged like a TV set, and we're doing 8 hours non-stop a day live. We basically we did a pirate TV station. That's what we have done here. And so because we have done a pirate TV station on a shoestring and with borrowed equipment, and we are only like 8 people, so sometimes these things happen and we can't hear the Zoom call. I've done lots of them. It's not that we can't do it, but somehow it's Friday and everybody's excited about the weekend. Guys, I would...
Time for a glass of
Si
wine.
alguien me dice qué está pasando, if anyone tells me what's going on, at least I can... he does that. That's something that they always do. The technicians, they always, when there's a problem, okay, I can hear myself. Can you speak?
Check, check, check. Hello,
Hello?
Joan. Can you hear
Yeah.
us?
I don't hear Damon. He's talking. Anyway,
Hello? Can you
I'll
hear me?
say
I'm also...
It's great when there's a problem on stage and the technician comes crawling as if they don't see them, but you do see them. You see them crawling. It always makes me laugh. It cracks me up.
This is just like being on tour. I feel very comfortable.
Yeah, but I don't hear you. I mean, I don't hear you. I love these guys. I want to hear them. I want to talk to them. They have important things to tell us. Damon, this week, he made an investigative work of finding out how much does it cost the hi-fi equipment that they have at Spotify headquarters. he saw a picture, and then by the magic of the internet, he said, help me out with this. And then he found how many streams do you need to buy that equipment. That's investigation. That's real journalism. And he could tell us about it.
Gosh.
If they were on air, of course. If only he could talk, he would say great things. And Cherie, if we could hear her, she would be saying amazing things that we would learn from. So this is my monologue.
Oh.
You are my props. You are just an excuse for me to... I can hear laughs, so that means that maybe you hear me.
Oh, can you hear us?
Yeah. Well,
can you hear me now as well? Okay, yes.
Okay, so yeah, it was just an excuse to break the ice.
No, it's a very good monologue, Joanne.
Yes.
I think you're heading for permanent TV.
Yeah,
TV host status.
You know what? Some people have told me this week, and my answer always is, I wouldn't have the freedom I have here to do anything I want and say anything I want. So no, I don't have any future in real TV. But this is great. I mean, I could be here all day. Well, I'll be here all day, actually. Let's go. Let's not talk about me. So we're here to talk about streaming, and let's get started. Damon, I think the main core of your thinking about music and audio and digital versus analog relies on the word context. How do you think streaming music as a way of listening to music makes us lose that context, or how does it affect that context that you always bring out?
Yeah, that's a really great word to use, Joanne. Thank you. It's true. That's at the root of a lot of what I've written about, because I think there's so much around music that we all share, but that doesn't necessarily make it to our media all the time. And every medium has a different way of framing context and things that it highlights and things that it loses. In digital, I've written about, technically, I think there's a loss of what I would call noise in digital media, and that's a lot of what my book, The New Analog, is about. And that has to do with losing the non-intentional, losing what you don't mean to transmit. So, for example, this show just started with this technical glitch, and we meant to just dive into a question, but instead we got a whole lot of non-intentional information because Joanne, you were forced to improvise and speak, and the guy was crawling on the floor, and that's all kind of noise to what was the intended signal of the show. But it actually gives you lots of information, right? We learned a whole lot in those few moments about how you've set up and what you're doing for the week and how this is working. And that's kind of information that we all use as viewers or listeners for a fuller picture of what we're receiving. So digital in general tends to eliminate noise in a very efficient way, more efficiently than analog media. Like we lose on an LP, we have the surface noise. We lose that in digital and CD. Streaming, to answer your question, the main thing that I think that streaming does is it replaces the context of the band, the album, the record label, where you are, how you are finding music. It replaces all of that with the company, with a platform, like Spotify, Apple Music, whatever it is. It isolates the music and puts you in the platform as the context. And really, I think these companies are driving to make the entire context their platform, because that's their goal, is to keep you on their platform. Their goal is not to send you to another band, to the band's rest of the catalog, or to another piece of the scene that they came out of, or any other kind of random thing that would happen in a record store. They want to keep you on the platform. That's the whole goal. So that would be my answer to that.
And Cherie, as a much younger person, who your experience of listening to music is very much shaped by streaming. What do you think about Damon's words? Are then the words of someone from a different era or not?
No, not necessarily. I mean, yeah, I guess thinking about my own, I guess like personal experience with technology, yeah, I would say close to half of my lifetime, I've primarily consumed music on streaming. I'm just thinking like Spotify, I believe launched in the US around 2011, 2012, and I had access to a subscription and like started paying for it pretty early on. So that has really like shaped a lot of the ways I discover music and think about music. Thinking about context specifically, I think the way that word comes up, or at least the way that I've seen it in industry conversations, kind of goes in like two seemingly contradictory, but definitely like complementary ways, as Damon was speaking to. So like on one hand, there's a lot of conversation around how the kinds of contexts that we were used to seeing. So I guess I'm thinking in this case less about like the actual sound and noise, but more about the story behind the music. So like even like small details like liner notes, like, you know, music fans were able to very easily find out who played the drums on this one specific track, or like their favorite track on this album, because it was built into the package in which, you know, physical music format was delivered. A lot of that context is stripped out due to various data and tech and political related reasons. Even though Spotify has, you know, a credit section for each song where you can list like the writer and producer, for so many songs is just blank. So it just like literally brings you to a dead end. Absolutely, the way Spotify is designed, I think, is trending more and more towards like isolating singles from albums. I guess rebundling them into playlists. But Damon, to your point, it's like, yeah, the platform is the context, and kind of Spotify is setting that agenda much more than the artist or even the fan. So that's kind of like one avenue of the lack of context. And I guess as I've been continually subscribing to Spotify, I've definitely noticed that if I want to find that context, Spotify is not my destination for that. I absolutely go off platform to whether it's like the artist's own social pages, or to YouTube, or Bandcamp, or like anywhere else where just that context is richer by design. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, in terms of like the inputs that inform music recommendation, there are dozens, if not like hundreds upon hundreds of different inputs, whether it's like user behavior, so like whether I skip a song or like stream through the whole way, or what time of day I'm listening, or in a more futuristic way, like if Amazon Alexa knows that I want to order lunch or something, like there probably is a world where that becomes an input, a very like personalized and algorithmically driven context behind putting this piece of music in front of me. So while on the one hand, we've definitely lost a lot of context on I guess that's more creative and more narrative in terms of like how this music came to be. The context is totally like, shifted to the platform. It's shifted to being totally like centered around the individual user. And yeah, we can dive more into this later, but I think it definitely leads to a more isolated experience, like a less communal experience that I think does drive a lot of the connections people have to music and to fellow fans. So yeah, that's something that I've definitely seen. And yeah, I think that is true of the platform regardless of I guess your age or your experience with the tech.
And
as well.
You said that specifically Spotify is setting the agenda. So do you think that the rest of DSPs are following that lead?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think you have seen this over the last 4 to 5 years. I believe it was in 2016 that Spotify first launched Discover Weekly, which at the time was, I think it was pretty groundbreaking in that it was really effective in creating a habit among a lot of its users, where every Monday you would get a personalized list of songs from artists that maybe that you are familiar with but you haven't listened to yet, or through some kind of collaborative filtering process, feeding you songs that people with similar tastes as you have listened to that you haven't yet. And it wouldn't save the songs, so it would like refresh every Monday, and so people were incentivized to like save their songs. And at the time, it was super groundbreaking. In the years since, I've seen basically every other competing service try to catch up to Spotify and basically offer the same kinds of playlists. So like I think every service has some version of Discover Weekly. It's either updated weekly or daily. Every service has some version of like daily mix. Every service has some kind of series of mood playlists or chill playlists, which like that type of playlist Spotify is also heavily promoted more than any other company, I think. And so that's I guess another important context in terms of the diversity or lack thereof in like how people consume music. And this is a trend you see with across multiple big tech platforms. Just this past week, Twitter launched Stories, and they're like certainly not the first company to launch Stories. They passed after LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and like all those kinds of companies are converging because they have to compete with each other, to the same interface, which is not very interesting. And I think we're seeing a similar movement in the music streaming economy in terms of like the kinds of channels offered, in terms of the design of like the actual apps. It is absolutely becoming more homogenized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Discover Weekly, I've written and complained a lot about Spotify, but like everybody, I was pretty dazzled by it when it came out. I mean, I thought I was really fascinated by what they chose. And then I got tired of it. I think this must have happened to a lot of people. The way I would express it for myself is I got tired of my own taste. I got tired of being fed back what was so predictably something I would be interested in. So at first it was like, oh yeah, wow, they're right. Like I like music like that. I like bands like that. And I was paying attention. But at a certain point, you feel like, for me personally, I want to get out of my habits and like find actually new things. I mean,
you want to be surprised.
Yeah, exactly. To be surprised. Discover was kind of a misnomer because it was more like, look in the mirror. And that gets, Cherie, to what you were saying, which I found really interesting about, the platform, as I was saying, is a context, but so is your own lifestyle and your own taste and history. And that, of course, is the other thing that these platforms do so well, is they start to contextualize everything in terms of ourselves, our own patterns of behavior, and our own, to the point where they claim they want to anticipate it, like Discover Weekly. And the problem, I think, is they can't get away from our own habits. And if you want to surprise yourself or stretch, it can be actually a challenge, I find, on these platforms for that very reason. It's hard to get out of the context that your own life creates. And of course, we deal with that in all kinds of ways in terms of class and where we live and all those issues in our lives that like the U.S. is really facing right now politically, our isolation within homogenized subgroups. But at the same time, it's actually really easy in physical space to get outside of that. Like you go to a different neighborhood than where you live in. And then very simply in music, you go to a record store. I mean, this is really getting old school, right? But I mean, it's just the simplest thing in the world. You go to a record store and browse, and there's just like accident. It's nothing but accident. It's hard to actually find what you want or what you thought you want. But it's easy to stumble on something. And that's where I think physical space and the types of context that we can't help but have by accident have not made it through to digital. And I think that's one problem we're facing with digital right now.
And you've been very openly critical with Spotify, so much that you've been one of the faces and names pushing the Union of America's campaign, the Union of Musicians campaign against Spotify to raise their rates. How is that going? How did that start? Can you tell us something about that? Damon?
Yeah, it's going remarkably well in terms of getting a reaction from musicians. So this is a new group called the Union of Musicians and Allied Workers, UMAW. And you can go to the website unionofmusicians.org and or .com, I forget. Search UMA, Union of Musicians, and it'll come up. And this is really new. This started during quarantine, during COVID, on Zoom, with a group of mostly much younger musicians. I'm the old guy, pretty much, in the group. And we're organizing around a group of a whole wide range of issues, not just streaming, but about safety in venues, about police, and the way that interacts with our lives as musicians, about labels and fair practices for bands. So a whole lot of issues, but they're all united by one thing, which is understanding that music is labor, and that as musicians, we are workers. And we face a lot of the same issues that workers in all kinds of other fields face. And that's why we really need some kind of collective representation that we don't have in the US in this particular way for independent, self-employed musicians. We have Music Union that exists and goes way back, but it's for people under salary contract, like they play in an orchestra. All the classical musicians belong to it, although interestingly, some have come and joined our group because they don't feel their needs right now are not being served by this traditional organization. So that's what we're working on. I'm part of a subcommittee that is focusing on streaming issues. And a few weeks ago, we launched a campaign called Justice at Spotify. And we have a list of demands, and you can sign them if you agree with them. And it's for musicians and all music workers. So, a lot of people work in music, like Joanne, you, who, although I know you also play music, primarily you're employed in other aspects of working with music. And we feel that there are so many of us touched by these same issues, and we need to be allied and look at them together and try and form a collective voice. So we've made basically 3 demands of Spotify. One is to raise our payment to 1 penny a stream, 1 cent. That's in US figures. But it could be fine. It could be 1 cent in euros. I don't care. It could be, it's like, fine. All of that is so much more than what they pay us now. 1 penny a stream. It doesn't seem like a crazy amount. And yet to Spotify, they say it would put them out of business. Now, how could that be? Well, it's because their business is set up not to support musicians. It's set up to dominate the market and the industry from their point of view. And if musicians can't survive, they really don't seem to care. And that's a really interesting shift, I think, from old battles that musicians had to face, say, for example, against major labels. Now, the major labels have had a big hand in setting up Spotify. They took part with ownership to give them copyright use. And so they created this monster to some degree. But, a record label still has to have musicians make records. Like, they cannot be in business. No matter how badly they behave or whatever shenanigans they pull, they have to have records to be in business. That's actually not true about Spotify. And Cherie actually is an expert on this, because as we've seen right now, Spotify is moving into podcasting. Because really what they need is they need your ears and they need your attention and your time on the platform. And they really don't care how they get you there or what you're doing on it. Actually, so if music falls away, that could happen and they could survive.
Now you mentioned this and that Cherie knows a lot about this. It's not only podcasts, but there's one thing that I read Cherie talk about, and I want to pick your brain a bit more about that because it really blew my mind. That you were saying that in years from now, thanks to artificial intelligence, maybe the record labels will sign Marvel superheroes, and they will put records out or singles, and that kind of forward thinking or thinking about what's going to happen in the future, it really. Can you tell me more about that? Was that something that you were just exaggerating to prove a point, or do you think that something? Where do you think it will lead?
Yeah, I'm I'm amused and glad that you picked. I think in the specific context that I was talking about this idea of, so I guess actually to step back a bit. So I think the original interview where I mentioned that like hypothetical of major labels signing Marvel superheroes was in the context of the rise of what I describe as the avatar economy. And this is something that has definitely had origins like, you know, decades prior to the pandemic into this year, but has definitely been exacerbated this year for many reasons. I think, yeah, I guess keeping it specific to music, obviously, as yeah, probably most people viewing this know, that the touring industry will not really be around for the next probably 6 to 12 months at least, you know, at pre-pandemic levels. A lot more artists therefore are kind of turning to the internet and to tech to create more interesting and immersive experiences for fans in a way that can still like emotionally resonate with them. So it's not, it could be just a, you know, just like an intimate or like direct Zoom call with fans, or I see a lot more artists, sorry, investing in these like much flashier, like animated, decked out versions of concerts. For example, Travis Scott doing a show in Fortnite. Lil Nas X just partnered with Roblox, which is a relatively newer gaming platform that is actually just filed to go public, on creating these kind of larger than life immersive worlds. And as part of those kinds of experiences, which are very immersive and interesting, as an artist, you have to create like an avatar of yourself. And there are and so aside from games, there are also companies out there like Genies. They're a company that partners directly with celebrities like Cardi B and J Balvin to make avatars of themselves that can live either on social media or can be, I guess, copy and pasted into games or any other kind of virtual environment. I think there are two main implications, and I will bring it back to the Marvel statement. One is that I with any of these kind of more futuristic situations, I try to like push it to its edge and see like, you know, what happens if we take this to its furthest extreme. And I feel like at its most extreme, this like trend in artists creating avatars of themselves to stand in for like all these online experiences represents some just like unending chase of scale. Like, oh, if we're going to be online, we have to be in as many places as possible, reach as many people as possible, in part because the streaming model incentivizes scale and rewards scale. So how can we do that without being awake 24 hours a day? Because we'll obviously be burnt out. We can just create like our second selves, and they can do the brand endorsement appearance for us. They can appear in this like movie or film for us, and we might like voice the avatar, but we don't have to do that much. So that's just like, yeah, kind of the logical endpoint of like these avatars continuing to grow is just this like constant pursuit of just being bigger and being more famous, even if it's not actually yourself. And then to bring it back to the Marvel point, there are a lot of these like virtual influencers or like virtual avatar celebrity figures. Like Lil Miquela is one of the most famous ones. She has millions of followers on Spotify and has also you know, released a lot of singles she has like 1 million followers on Instagram, I meant to say, and she's also released a lot of singles in collaboration with real artists, but it's still like her, the avatar. And there probably was, or maybe is, a point where she's shopping label deals. Like, you know, oh, as a label, I want to sign this avatar because she already has a proven following. To be clear, there is like a quite big engineering team behind Miquela. Brud is the company that I guess makes the avatar. But it seems like it's much easier to like, it's so weird to say, but there's like a less like human element to it that makes it more efficient. And I think along with like scale, there's this element of like efficiency. And once you're at that corporate level, you know, always wanting to make sure that you can keep your costs low, but you can still like bring in as much revenue as possible. And I feel like signing avatar celebrities that can act much more efficiently without, speaking of surprise, without that much, you know, surprise along the way, kind of serves that mission. And so, yeah, so say they signed like Captain America. I feel like major labels already get so much flack and like justify critique from the artist community for like bad contracts, you know, these deals not being equitable. And so like, what if they start signing more, what if they not only have inequitable deals, but also don't even give those deals to human artists, but instead give them to more and more of these characters? I don't think that's totally unrealistic. And I think that like that scenario would also draw even more backlash.
That's what I meant. Never thought about it, and then all of a sudden it sounded like, yeah, it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, all the seeds for this are being planted right now, I think.
Yeah, and also if you look at what Daniel Ek says, for example, the head of Spotify, about musicians who complain, like me, about how, you know, dealing with them, what he says is, well, you're just stuck in an old way. Like you can't just make one record every 3 or 4 years. This is a statement he made a couple months ago that really made a lot of musicians mad. He said, you know, you need to produce more because they pay us so little. So it's like you need more content. And that fits exactly with what Cherie is talking about. It's like it's an economy of scale, meaning it only works in the millions or actually tens of millions or even billions of streams. And so it may not be human. Like what he's asking just may not relate to human activity, which gets back to, again, why I'm in this group that's a labor union. I mean, what could be more 20th century than a labor union? It's pre-digital, right? But what it's centered on is human labor. And I think that the danger of online businesses is losing the connection to human labor. Like humans actually have a lot of limitations, but the internet doesn't always recognize them, you know? And I think we've rewarded, as consumers and as certainly as capital investors, the market has rewarded a lot of business plans and a lot of structures for interaction that don't acknowledge the human being. You know, and I think we face this all the time in our daily lives now, especially right now under lockdown, where we're denied so much of our routine off-screen interaction. So we're really limited to, you know, what we're doing right now, which, you know, is amazing. Like here we are joining Joanne in Spain without having to leave our homes,
magic, yeah.
Which is, you know, a huge plus. But on the other hand, like I would really like to be there with Joanne and have a drink at a bar after this event, which is what we would normally do. And that would lead to all kinds of other interactions and conversations and drinks that, you know, we're not going to get to have. And that is a limitation that we can't translate onto screen. And when you put this to music, I think you do face these ridiculous situations. It sounds absurd to say they will sign avatars instead of human musicians. But on the other hand, as Joanne, as you're saying, it's also totally logical, because they want us to behave like avatars of ourselves anyway. You know, to have this like caricature of yourself, you're just a, you know, a simulacrum of what a human musician really is. And you know, I have a whole other interest in digital recording and what that's done to sound and to music making, and it relates to this too, because what can go into the computer as sound for digital recording is a bit different than what goes in onto tape. And although there are obviously many continuities and similarities, and you can mix the two, and we all do. If you think hard about, you know, what works in the two environments, it's often eliminating the human element that makes it easier to record in computers. For example, you can make a beat and an entire track sitting, well, this is pre-COVID, sitting in a cafe with your headphones on and your laptop, and you don't need anything else. You don't need an expensive room with soundproofing and, you know, instruments and all the rest. And so it becomes very easy in digital, very enticing and really seductive to make sound that works in this environment. And I think it's the same with labor. It becomes very enticing to just do the labor that this environment is asking of us. But on the other hand, we also have a crisis because the environment is not paying us for this labor. We're not being paid for our social media. We're not being paid for our time online. And yet we need to make a living. And that's really kind of a crisis for so many musicians. And COVID has thrown it into relief because we can't do the offline part of our jobs.
But talk about dystopic scenarios. Ted Gioia the American journalist, jazz critic, he wrote, I think it was this week, something else that I hope I got it right. He said something that it could be possible that eventually, if there's a DSP that doesn't really need musicians because they already have your attention and you are already in the platform, that they would give free space, of course, for superstars because they do need them, but anyone else, like more than 80%, may have to pay for exposure just to be there. Instead, not only not get paid as you are demanding, but have to pay to actually be there. Do you think that's also something that could happen?
Yeah, I think in some ways we already do that. For example, to go back to Spotify, Spotify has this free tier, as they call it, or ad-supported is the way they talk about it. In other words, you don't have to pay as a consumer to use Spotify the way you do for Tidal or Apple Music. And we have no choice. So in a way, that already is kind of coming out of our cost. To be on Spotify, we have to give away our work to a degree, and yet we need to be on Spotify as musicians. I mean, you don't need to. We could all withdraw. But you know who musicians are? They're people who want to be heard. Like that's why you go traipsing around Spain.
You could not all withdraw. It wouldn't be realistic because it would be a minority doing that. It wouldn't change anything.
Absolutely, and also it's well.
I think Spotify
if everybody got
thing.
together,
I like it and I
it.
use it. It's I believe it's more how to make it better, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I think that's always a better starting point. At least it's more optimistic, because as I say, we all want to be heard. Sharing your music is not a bad thing. I think it's really important to kind of like remind ourselves that sharing is actually a huge positive, and it's what we do as musicians naturally. It's what you do when you play physical music in a space. You're sharing the music, you're sharing the time and the space with people. And I think it's the same when you record. It's just remote, but you make music on a recording, and then you want to play it for people. I mean, it's not. It doesn't typically attract kind of art for art's sake people. It attracts people who want to engage, and we're all that way, I think. And so we want our music heard, and that's not a bad thing. But that is also why, and this gets confused a lot. I thought Napster was a good thing. I'm not against free in terms of sharing, because I think actually that's really natural and human again. But what I resent about the current situation is the enormous profits that some corporations are making from our gift. Like it's my music, I'm free to give it away, and that can be a very beautiful gesture. But Spotify, they're making billions, $50 billion company right now valued, because we've all been asked to share our music for free, and that's really weird. And that is already kind of that dystopic idea of, well, you got to pay to have your music heard. When generation one of the internet was the opposite. It was like, there's no way to put money across this format, so we're just going to share. And that upset Lars from Metallica and a couple of other people, but it didn't upset most musicians I know. Yeah.
So Cherie, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I guess first I want to address, I guess Damon's point about the contrast between, the very high profits and like large profits that these tech companies are seeing, and then like what artists are compensated with. One idea that I've just been like pushing around in my head a lot this year is the fact that, and I don't quite have a solution for this, but it's definitely like a challenge, is that the current streaming landscape does treat music as a commodity. And by that, like every time a streaming service licenses, music from, say, major labels or rights holders, all the services are licensing the exact same music, and probably for like a similar price. And so there's like very little differentiation of content. And so like for the services, arguably they are also on a race to the bottom on price, especially as they expand internationally. And so that's like even further exacerbating this issue of artists being compensated properly. And then, yeah, and then there's like a huge contrast between that and all of the like major publishing deals that have been happening, where like Shamrock spent like $300 million on Taylor Swift's like master recordings, and like I think those prices are there because there's a sense of scarcity. Like there's only one of like Taylor Swift's master catalog. This is like a coveted copyright. Whereas if you like go on the total flip side of that, as an emerging artist releasing your music for the first time, Damon, building off the point you made, you are being forced into this landscape if you want to reach some kind of audience where you don't have any control over the price of your own work, or until maybe in the future over royalty rates, you kind of just accept what is given, and you're going into this landscape where your music is being treated as a commodity in a playlist controlled by platforms as something that is like easily disposable. So yeah, that's just it. Like from step one, like it's even more of an uphill battle for that reason. That's one point. And then to the original question about whether this kind of platform already exists, Spotify recently launched, or so they changed the name of their autoplay feature, where you have like tracks recommended for you after a playlist is done, from autoplay to discovery mode. And they're piloting a feature where as an artist you can get more exposure in discovery mode. So it's autoplay and also like artist radio stations, in exchange for a promotional royalty rate, aka lower royalty rate. And this is, so Spotify has done a bunch of other like advertising initiatives like this, where like it definitely favored major label artists. It was not really accessible to indie artists, but this feature, at least from like my conversations, it seems to be one of the few where just everyone across the board is like not very happy with it, or just doesn't really understand
do you think
the
that
benefit.
they are testing the waters with that? Because some people are talking about Payola already.
Yep. And like, so even if, there are many layers to Payola specifically. So like, I guess traditionally Payola has taken the form of like labels handing, cash to radio promoters, or like who then those promoters hand cash to the DJs, who then in exchange for that money, play, like give a certain song more spins. Even if it doesn't exactly take that form on like Spotify playlists or streaming playlists, I do think, there is, I guess the bigger question is like, is there more of a direct advantage to people who have just more capital to spend? And this is like absolutely true for any like advertising centric social platform. So like it's common knowledge that Facebook and Instagram are essentially pay to play ecosystems. Like if you want to reach all of your followers above a certain threshold, you do have to pay. It's like a marketing cost. And Spotify is increasingly like, in so many ways, it's ironic because I feel like a lot of its earlier marketing and branding was around being this quote unquote disruptive company. We're not a gatekeeper, like that kind of rhetoric, but now they're absolutely not only a gatekeeper, but are also becoming increasingly like a platform like Facebook. I think they want to become something like, a Facebook for music marketing in terms of how artists and music companies pay them, which is super far from, a more level, open, more organic, algorithmically driven like consumption platform, which encourages discovery like down the long tail. If anything, this absolutely will favor the companies and artists who have more capital, namely like probably closer to the 1%.
And you talked about all these DSPs having the same content, basically, in almost the same price and offering the same content. Why is it that with video and film, TV series, we have Netflix or HBO or Hulu or Amazon Prime? So we have different options that we have to subscribe to watch what we want to watch. Whereas in music, everyone is offering exactly the same content. Do you think that that may change?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's definitely, or I guess people will have their own stances on this. I don't think I think the current streaming landscape in film and video, kind of as you laid out, like tons of different services, each with their own exclusive content, is probably good for the film industry, but it's not the best viewer experience, because I think very few people are going to be able to afford like $60 to $100 a month to have access to like hundreds or thousands of shows, most of which they're probably not going to watch. I think that's just also not a feasible model. There are some interesting like format differences between music and video, and like the incentives of these services, and also like who owns them. So I guess there are a couple of angles. One would be, so a lot of these services are owned or co-owned by the studios themselves. So like Disney, I think, has a huge advantage because they are a major corporation now, and they have so many really good TV shows and films that are all now on Disney Plus, most of them exclusive. So that's one advantage. That would be the equivalent of like a Universal Music Group launching its own like Universal Music Plus competitor to Spotify. I don't think that would work, just because the average fan, interestingly, is like less, there's less allegiance to the actual label now. Like the label is just, in that case, it's more just like a back-end services company, whereas they have much more allegiance to the artist regardless of the label. So I don't think a label-specific service would work. There's also the element of music and video just being totally different viewer experiences. For like a really good movie or TV show, that's not something you want to listen to in the background. And also, like, very often it'll be between like 20 and like 180 minutes. It's like a much more long form and immersive experience. I think there's also like more of a culture of, I guess pre-COVID, of like going to the theater to watch a movie. And so like there's that culture also of like treating it as a more premium experience. Whereas with music, and especially with Spotify, it's the way that they like advertise how to use their service and the way that they curate music. It's like meant to be like totally mobile first, on the go. You can listen to it in the background. It's like the soundtrack to your life. I think the writer Liz Pelly has used the term like wallpaper. It's like sonic or emotional wallpaper. That's a fundamentally different kind of service and user experience from like sitting down to binge a Netflix show. At that content level is just totally different. So,
but when you mentioned video being long format, that's what it's happening with podcasts. Podcasts
that's
are
true.
long format.
Yeah. So actually, we are. Sorry.
And they are exclusive to the platform.
Yes, actually, that is a really good point, and I think that is directly tied to music, given that Spotify, one of the biggest. The biggest music streaming subscription platform by number of subscribers, is now incentivized to like treat music as an afterthought in terms of like business development and always be chasing these podcast deals. Absolutely, we will be seeing. Actually, yes, I think we will be seeing a landscape where all of the biggest music streaming platforms now, so like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, even like Deezer and Tidal to an extent, they all will do to podcasts what is happening to film and TV and streaming, where like there absolutely now is a bidding war for tons of both like up and coming podcasters and major celebrity podcasters, especially in Spotify's case. And this is like what is convincing me, or like it makes me really motivated to just think about new models for music streaming or music consumption in the future. Because then, okay, so as like an artist or record label, what do you even do, like looking at this, like all of the major platforms that are so important to like consumption and exposure for your work are now like their head is turned a whole other way, to a whole other economy, building, off of the backs of the audiences and the catalogs that are more on the music side that they've built up for decades. But the priority is not in music. What does that mean for the music industry? I think if not already in like 2021, that will really come to a head as these services continue to invest more in podcasts in a way that they haven't really done for music.
And Damon, as a podcaster yourself, what is your take on this?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I made this podcast, but it's not an ongoing one. It was just deliberately 6 episodes, so it was a series, and it was planned that way and written that way from the start.
But you will do podcasts. You were very
well. No, I'm interested actually in doing more, but that's another interesting problem because the podcasts I want to make, I want to have music on them, and you can't because of licensing problems. Although now Spotify is working around this by launching a platform.
Yeah, they call it music and spoken word format.
Mm-hmm. Where you would be able to use the music that they have on the platform, and they would continue to pay the musicians the pittance that we get for our regular plays. But that relates to this big revelation when I started doing a podcast, which is this. It was a really beautiful experience making my podcast. I did it with a nonprofit group in the U.S. called Radiotopia. They're connected to National Public Radio and Public Radio International, PRI and NPR. And so these are people who, they mostly come out of journalism, they come out of radio, and they come out of a nonprofit world. It's very different mood than I'd ever experienced as a musician, working, you're always working in commercial context in music, at least as our part of music. If you're a classical musician, or a jazz musician also, you often would come across nonprofit issues more than I ever had. But it was really fascinating to work with these people. They're very, very dedicated to the content of what they're working with, because it's not about selling it. In the end, it's really about communicating the content. But then there was this remarkable thing where I learned that they don't get any royalties. They have no royalties for podcasts. They are royalty free. And so, of course, Spotify and the other platforms are fascinated by podcasts. They don't have to pay even the tiny little bit they pay for music. They don't even have to pay that. So podcasts are they're podcasted, they're downloaded and streamed for free. And this was a result of Apple, not Spotify, historically. What Apple did was they built a distribution network for podcasts through iTunes. And really, pre-Spotify getting into podcasting and other places, this was your only way, really, to widely distribute your podcast. You had to go into iTunes. iTunes made a decision right away. You could not attach a price to your podcast. It must be free to be on the iTunes list. So nobody could charge for podcasts. So what did they do? They turned to advertising and sponsorship, which again was a very comfortable for nonprofits because that's how they already work. It's different in Europe where you have government-sponsored radio, but here our nonprofit radio, NPR, PRI, is supported by sponsors who then place little ads inside the program. And and radio people coming out of commercial radio, again, the radio is free when you turn it on the dial. You don't pay a subscription to get the radio, but you have commercials. So they're very used to selling ad space. So iTunes took advantage of this idea of people coming out of radio, and we're like, great, we'll distribute your thing for free, but you don't get anything for the number of downloads we have. And lo and behold, the downloads went into the millions and millions for even rather obscure sounding shows, like coming out of nonprofit producers like Radiotopia that I worked with, had huge hits. Serial, Serial, not breakfast cereal, was a breakthrough show here in the U.S. for podcasting. It was a kind of a true crime, very well written and well produced drama. But it came out of nonprofit. It came out of NPR people. So it didn't come out of major labels like music does, where you have like pop stars and blah blah blah. But Serial was doing numbers that would make any major label jealous. I mean, just millions and millions and millions of people listening to this every week. So, of course, everybody got interested. How do we get into podcasting? And lo and behold, it doesn't cost them a dime. Spotify has found a way to throw money at it, like signing celebrities, as Cherie was mentioning, for exclusive podcast deals. But still, they don't have to pay. I'm sure these people don't have royalty deals. It has to do only with upfront costs and underwriting production, and maybe sharing ad money. We don't really know. And again, this gets back to another demand, which I didn't get to mention from my Justice at Spotify campaign, which is transparency. We don't know how this company makes any money. They claim they're still losing money. They just reported again a loss last quarter. I think it was like of $600 million or something. This $50 billion company says they're broke all the time. Obviously, they're not. They have the most expensive office space in New York. They have a $75,000 turntable stereo that I just broadcast on Twitter for everybody to mock in their office in New York. How do they pay for all this if they're losing money every quarter? Well, they're not losing money. They just don't show a profit in the part that they want to show us. But they should show us everything if this is how they're going to run the business and say, we're paying you out of what we can. They need to show us more. Podcasting is a perfect example. It's completely opaque. What the hell is going on these platforms? They've paid this shock jock, as we say here in the US, Joe Rogan, who's really an offensive host and has offensive people on his show, $100 million to be exclusive on Spotify. What is the money really happening? Where does the money go? What's it going on?
Now you mentioned Rogan. There's one thing about this new music and spoken word format that I wonder about. If they can use any music on a podcast, like you're doing like Joe Rogan is doing a podcast and he wants to use music, and because of the kind of blanket license he can use anything on Spotify, he may end up using, for example, Damon's music without his consent. Would this be possible? I don't know. Cherie, do you know how this is going to work? Do you know more about this?
Yeah. Right before addressing that, I also wanted to point out that it's super interesting to hear the story, which I wasn't too familiar about actually, about how the way that podcasts are monetized now is largely due to this very just one way method of distributing podcasts, which was determined by Apple. A really important aspect, largely due to licensing reasons, of the music and spoken word hybrid format is that it can only exist on Spotify. And I feel like a major benefit, even if it led to no royalties, of podcast distribution, the way it traditionally works is that you can, listen to it. The common term is, listen to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Like there are tens or dozens of different apps that are out there. Whereas this is Spotify is very clearly creating a closed ecosystem for this kind of format. That's definitely a growing concern in the podcast community, at least from what I've heard. Yeah, and then in terms of, I think I looked into this a little bit in terms of the policy around permission. I think it's very loose for now. It's just if you're going to include music in the show, make sure you reach out to the artist beforehand and give them a heads up. But I feel like that'll be very difficult to enforce, and it probably will get to a certain point where, whether it's Joe Rogan or some other person, some other person creating a more offensive or hateful show and including certain songs in it, it'll probably get to that point. And I mean, already specifically with Joe Rogan, but in general, I think I've seen some stories based in Europe on independent podcasts that had hate speech in them, or that had content that technically violated Spotify's terms of service, but they were still on. I think there's been some controversies around that. And Spotify, I feel they're just facing so many of the same issues as YouTube. YouTube stance on censoring or taking down Joe Rogan's content is also not very clear. And I think in response to Joe Rogan having Alex Jones on the podcast, spreading some very widely debunked conspiracy theories, like Daniel X said, we very vaguely, we have a very clear content policy, and we're not taking this down. And it didn't really address the specific elements of that episode. I really haven't seen any big tech company, for that matter, communicate their content policies clearly. I think that would be really helpful both for creators and just for consumers to make sure that they're in an environment that's safe for themselves as well. So yeah, Spotify is I guess to sum it up, it's going into a very like years old problem. It's definitely not innovative in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very murky. And then I also just want to mention that because we've had this problem already with Spotify of brands sponsoring playlists
Yep.
and they can put any music they want on it. Like you don't get the chance to say, I don't want to endorse this brand by being on their playlist. And it was the band Deer, I think it was, that was made a fuss about this a few years ago. And I thought it was a brilliant point. Like Nike, if Nike wanted to use my music in an ad, this is one of the few remaining points of power that musicians have and songwriters, the use of their work in commercial context like that. They would have to pay us and we would have to negotiate individually for it. And we also have the power, of course, to say no, which is why they have to negotiate with us. But on Spotify, it disappears. So Nike can have a playlist and just put Deerhoof on it. And it's as if Deerhoof is on a Nike playlist. But Deerhoof doesn't get any more than they would for any other playlist on Spotify, which is next to nothing. So this is sort of extending it to podcasting. And it's another kind of, it's another taking away of musicians' power, really, or control over their own work. Yeah. And that's a really dangerous place. That said, what I really would wish, and this would be, I will make another podcast when this happens. I wish podcasters could make use freely of music, but just pay a standard fee like we do to make a cover song or to play a song on the radio. Any radio station can play my music, and I don't get a chance to say no there either. But they have to pay all musicians the same rate. Me and Beyonce, same. Cover a song, cover Beyonce, cover me, you get the same rate. And it's an obligatory license. And that was set by the government a long time ago. And we have had no government action over these issues like the ones that Cherie is raising for all these companies. YouTube is wild, it's still the Wild West here online. But increasingly it's being run by a handful of monopolistic companies. And that's the only law there is. So it's really out of control in that way. I would rather have anarchy, frankly. I would rather have everybody allowed to use everything the way we had it the first generation of the internet before it was monetized. Yeah, I definitely have that. I might also be some Jewish Eastern European anarchist in me. But the two combined to say that's okay too.
So we have 2 minutes left, and I still had two subjects I wanted to talk about, so we're not going to go over them. It was live streaming, which is something that we should be worried about because there are a lot of different rights involved in streaming music and then keeping it, because this is on YouTube. It doesn't stay, but it stays for hours. Like if you want to go back and watch what happened 2 hours ago, you can do it. So that in a way that's a recording. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was UCPS, the user-centric paying system. But I think Cherie can possibly in 1 minute say something about the live streaming, at least the issues that are involved.
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best. Yeah, I think it's always been this way, but it's like for me and I think for the industry, it's like really like climax this year that like live streaming is just a legal minefield because it combines literally every kind of right that exists in the music industry. If you're going to be live streaming with music, you need a performance license. If you're doing a DJ set, you probably need a master license. And then if you want to make the recording available on demand, you do need a sync and kind of publishing license from that side. And there's probably some, like name and likeness rights are absolutely involved, especially as like, avatars come into the picture as well. So it's like every single kind of right is like implicated in just like a simple 10-minute live stream on Instagram and Twitch. I do understand how complicated it can be to like try to communicate all those different rights to say like a Twitch game streamer or to like a DJ trying to go live on Instagram. But I think the situation could be better in terms of just like very similar to like a content policy, just like laying out, what specifically you have to do to, prevent your stream from getting taken down, or even explaining like why your stream was taken down. I think this is a major issue that people have had with Twitch. So I guess the RIAA came in and issued a bunch of DMCA related takedowns. And then I guess all of them happened like a lot at once with very little advance notice and with just with very little explanation. So, and so I think that just was like really poorly handled. And it just also stifles like experimentation and innovation. As someone like from my end who's always encouraging people to like try to experiment, think of new ways for us to have these kinds of experiences. I know it definitely is like a hindrance to a lot of entrepreneurs who are trying to build like new live streaming platforms, but have to go to every single kind of rights holder in like dozens of different countries to get these licenses. So hopefully in the next year we'll see some very similar to podcasts, actually, like hopefully some kind of blanket solution, especially for these newer platforms that comes up.
Well, then I think that was great. Thank you both for such an interesting talk. It wasn't really a debate. I mean, you didn't fight. But
no, we're both very agreeable. I think we agree on almost everything.
But it's been fantastic.
But I'm glad you asked questions at the end, Jean, because then we can take those up next year.
Yeah, okay, let's do that. I invite you, hopefully in person. Okay, thank you both very much.
Thank you,
thank
Jean.
you as well. This is great.
And thanks everyone, and I'll see you in an hour. We proceed with our broadcast.